On a quiet afternoon that felt no different from any other day, people all over the world were living their normal lives. Some were at work, some were stuck in traffic, some were eating lunch, some were scrolling on their phones, and some were simply resting at home. No one imagined that history was about to change without warning. The sky was calm, the air was still, and nothing suggested that anything strange was on the way. But far above the clouds, something huge was already moving toward Earth, something that would make billions of people stop whatever they were doing and look. Up in disbelief, it began with a vibration in the air. Birds scattered from their paths, animals became uneasy, and weather stations started picking up signals that didn't match any natural pattern. At first, people thought it was just another atmospheric disturbance. Some thought it might be a storm, or maybe a test from some country. But the vibration grew stronger and stronger until even people sitting inside their homes could feel a faint tremor in their bones. Windows hummed. Metal objects gave off a soft ringing sound. The world stood on the edge of a mystery dot, and it happened. The clouds above several major cities across, the world split apart as enormous shapes broke through. At first they looked like giant shadows, dark and impossible to understand. People ran outside, staring up at the sky, trying to figure out what they were seeing. Phones were raised instantly. Live streams began. Social media flooded with shaky videos and confused messages. No one knew what these shapes were. Many thought they were massive aircraft. Some believed they were meteors. A few whispered that they might be something else entirely. As the shapes pushed fully through the clouds, their details became clear. They were not planes. They were not balloons. They were not human creations. They were colossal vessels with strange patterns on their surfaces, glowing lines running along their sides like veins of light. They were too large to measure with human eyes alone. One vessel was big enough to cast a shadow over an entire city. The sky darkened under them, as if a second night had arrived. Early. Governments around the world went into instant emergency mode. Military bases activated protocols that had never been used outside of training drills. Fighter jets scrambled into the air. High-level officials rushed into protected command centers. Scientists and analysts were pulled from their workstations and shoved into conference rooms. Every screen, every news channel, every social feed became one thing: the arrival of the unknown. Some people panicked, running in every direction without knowing where to go. Others froze, unable to move or speak as they watched the sky. Many simply stared with wide eyes, trying to make sense of what was unfolding. It felt unreal, like a scene from a movie, but the fear was far too real. It was happening right above them. Amid the global chaos, one quiet detail stood out, though very few people noticed it at first. The enormous ships were not attacking. They did not fire anything. They did not release smaller ships. They did not change direction. They drifted downward slowly, carefully, almost as if they were trying not to alarm anyone. Even though their size alone made it impossible to stay calm. In a research center far from the noise of the big cities. A scientist named Dr. Halden watched the footage closely. He wasn't chosen by anyone. He wasn't part of any special team yet. He was simply one of the few people who could look at something new and search for patterns instead of panic. While most people saw danger, he saw design. While others saw terror, he saw intention. He zoomed in on every angle he could find and studied the smooth curves, the glowing lines, and the controlled descent. Something about the ships seemed almost ceremonial, as if their arrival followed a tradition or a ritual from another world. While the world braced for impact, he noticed one important thing. These ships weren't descending like a military invasion. They weren't diving in aggressively or locking onto targets. They were simply arriving. It was the difference between someone breaking down your door and someone knocking on it. Even so, no one felt safe. As minutes turned into an hour, the largest vessel finally stopped its descent. It hovered at a height low enough for everyone to see, but high enough to remain unreachable. A deep hum spread through the air, soft yet powerful, like a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight into the chest. People fell silent in the streets, watching with trembling breaths. Then a beam of light emerged from the center of the ship. It stretched downward slowly and formed a single solid pillar that touched the ground in a wide open field. The beam wasn't hot. It didn't burn the earth. It simply existed, glowing with a warmth that felt almost welcoming. But no one dared to approach it. Soldiers surrounded the area instantly. News helicopters circled overhead. The whole world held its breath as something began to take shape inside the beam. A silhouette, a pier dot. It grew clearer and clearer until it became obvious that it wasn't a machine. It was a figure, tall, thin, graceful in a way that seemed unnatural. It stepped out of the beam, its body made of soft light that gradually shifted into a physical form. The figure stood still for a long moment, as if adjusting to the gravity or the air. Then it looked around, observing the humans, the soldiers, the cameras pointed at it. No weapon in its hand. No armor. It came alone. The world expected an attack. But instead, the figure raised its hand slowly in what looked like a peaceful gesture. The gesture wasn't entirely human, but the intention behind it felt clear. A greeting. Or maybe a request for calm. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then someone in the military shouted orders. Soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons. News anchors whispered urgently into their microphones. People watching from home leaned closer to their screens. This was first contact, and no one knew how to handle it. The figure spoke, and though the words were not any human language, everyone heard the meaning inside their minds. It wasn't telepathy exactly. It felt more like a voice that translated itself the instant it was heard. The message was simple, yet powerful. It came from the heart of an empire that had traveled light years across the galaxy. The message was this: Earth will now stand before the empire. People didn't know what that meant. Some took it as a warning. Some took it as a demand. A few hoped it meant friendship. But whatever the meaning was, the world knew one truth. This was no small group of explorers. This was an empire. A civilization advanced enough to cross the stars. Powerful enough to appear above Earth, without any warning. Confident enough to land in broad daylight. The mood of the world shifted from shock to fear, and then to something deeper. Uncertainty. No one knew what the empire wanted or why it had come now. No one knew if Earth was in danger, or if this was the beginning of a golden age of discovery. People argued, cried, prayed, and questioned everything they believed. Back in his small research center, Dr. Halden felt something different from most. As he replayed the footage, studying every movement and every detail of the alien figure, he noticed again that there was no aggression, no hostile posture, no signs of conflict. Instead, he sensed a strange hesitation in the figure's stance, as if the empire was not as strong as it appeared. The ships were massive, but they moved slowly. The technology was advanced, but the patterns looked worn. The envoy stood tall, but its body seemed tired in tiny ways only a trained eye could see. He leaned closer to the screen, whispering to himself, "They're not here to destroy us." That single thought stayed with him even as the world spiraled into fear. It would later become the key to everything that followed. But for now, Earth stood frozen under the shadow of the Empire, waiting for answers. No one yet had died. The world did not sleep that night. Every city, every town, every village stayed awake, glued to screens or huddled around radios, as the strange figure from the Empire stood inside the bright pillar of light. Governments tried to calm the public, but their messages sounded weak, compared to the image floating across every channel. People whispered questions with shaky voices. Why had the Empire come here? What did it want? And what did that simple but chilling message truly mean? Inside emergency command rooms, world leaders talked over each other. Some demanded immediate defense. Others wanted communication. A few believed negotiation was the only chance for survival. The room buzzed with fear more than confidence. No one present had ever prepared for something like this. There were plans for war, for disasters, for pandemics, for economic collapse, but no plan for a giant fleet from another world hovering over Earth. While the leaders argued, the alien envoy waited in silence, standing calmly inside the pillar of light. The soldiers surrounding it did not lower their weapons. They kept their eyes locked on its every movement, unsure whether it would attack or speak again. Hours passed, and not a single word came from the envoy. It simply observed, as if measuring Earth's reaction dot by sunrise. The crowd of civilians watching from behind the military barriers grew larger. More cameras, more microphones, more people holding their breath in quiet fear. The air felt heavy with tension. Parents held their children close. Elderly people wiped tears from their eyes. Teenagers filmed everything. No one knew if this day would end peacefully or if it would mark the beginning of something terrible. Finally, as the morning sun rose, the envoy raised its hand again. The same soft voice echoed in people's minds. Calm, steady, without any emotion. Earth will present its leaders. The words made thousands of officials across the world look at one another in confusion. Present them where? Did the alien want every leader physically present? Was it asking for a meeting? A surrender? A ceremony? Before anyone could decide, the beam of light brightened, and an image formed above the envoy. A projection, almost like a floating hologram. It showed a large hall made of silver stone, with symbols carved into the walls. Rows of tall figures sat on high seats, wearing long garments that looked ancient and ceremonial. This was not the ship interior. This was something else. A place of authority. A place where decisions were made. The envoy spoke again. This is the chamber of judgment. Earth must accept guidance from the Empire. Agreement will ensure your survival. That one word, survival, was enough to send fear ripping through the crowd. Journalists shouted questions that the envoy ignored. Soldiers tightened their stance. Leaders around the world stared at the projection. In silence. Survival. The Empire had not come for exploration. It had come with a demand. Not a friendly one. Not a neutral one. A demand wrapped in a warning dot. As global confusion spread, the military communication channels buzzed with updates. The giant ships hovering above Earth remained still. No weapons activated. No new signals were detected. Just the same hum pulsing through the sky. It felt like a quiet threat. Not violence yet, but the hint of what could come. In a government research facility far away from the landing site. Dr. Halden sat surrounded by screens. He had barely slept. His eyes were red from staring at the patterns on the alien ship hulls. He recorded the envoy's gestures, the rhythm of the hum, the symbols etched into the vessel's surface. He wasn't looking for danger. He was looking for weaknesses. Something about the Empire did not match the threatening message they delivered. If they truly wanted destruction, why only bring one envoy? Why arrive so slowly? Why avoid using any force? Why choose the middle of the day when every camera could capture their arrival? It felt like they were making more of a statement than showing strength. Almost as if they needed Earth to believe they were unbeatable. While he worked, the research center buzzed with messages from military teams. Some wanted his analysis immediately for strategy. Others demanded he identify possible defense options. But he wasn't thinking about fighting. He was thinking about understanding. And the more he watched, the more he felt something important. The Empire might not be as strong as it wanted the world to believe. Meanwhile, in the main landing zone, diplomats finally stepped forward toward the alien envoy. They wore protective suits, unsure if the alien atmosphere or technology might be harmful. The envoy watched them approach, unmoving, its expression unreadable. One diplomat slowly lifted a translator device, even though the envoy had already shown it could communicate without one. He introduced himself, voice trembling slightly, and asked the most important question on everyone's mind. What does the Empire want from Earth? The envoy answered instantly, as if the answer had never been in question. Submission. The word spread across the field like a wave of cold air. Civilians gasped. Soldiers exchanged nervous looks. News channels repeated the word again and again. Submission, not partnership, not cooperation. Submission. The envoy continued. The Empire offers protection, stability, and knowledge. In return, Earth will follow the laws of the Empire and contribute to its renewal. The last part of the message caught Dr. Halden's attention when he replayed the recording later. Contribute to its renewal. Renewal implied something was decaying. Something was weak. Something needed fixing. Renewal was not a word used by a powerful conqueror. It was used by someone trying to rebuild. The diplomats asked the envoy to explain further, but it refused. Instead, it gave a simple order. Present Earth's answer. Leaders across the world panicked. How could anyone answer so quickly? How could any nation decide the fate of the entire planet with one message? Some leaders argued that surrender was the safest choice. Others refused to bow to an unknown force. Many wanted more time. But the envoy stood silently, waiting. Hours passed. The world became a battlefield of opinions. Newsrooms filled with debates. Social media exploded with messages of fear and anger. Protesters gathered outside government buildings, demanding transparency. Some people begged for peace. Some shouted that Earth should fight back. Some simply cried, overwhelmed by the situation. While humanity argued, Dr. Halden made a new discovery. He analyzed the ship patterns again and noticed that several sections were damaged. Not from battle, but from age. The glowing lines were flickering in places. The movement of the ships was slower than expected for something so advanced. The design was brilliant, but the condition was not perfect. He sent his findings to officials. With a simple message, the Empire might not be as strong as they pretend. His message reached the military council just as they were about to draft Earth's response. The information caused an immediate pause. If the Empire was weak, then rushing into surrender might be the worst decision possible. They needed time. They needed clarity. They needed to think like humans, not like frightened prey. A small team of representatives returned to the envoy and respectfully requested more time to discuss the Empire's terms. The envoy's expression didn't change, but its voice softened slightly. Time will be allowed. But the Empire does not wait long. The beam of light flickered, and the envoy stepped backward into it. The figure dissolved into bright particles until only the empty light pillar remained. Then the beam vanished, snapped away like someone switching off a lamp. The envoy was gone, but the ships remained. The sky still hummed with a low vibration. The shadows still stretched across cities. People still watched with wide eyes. Earth felt locked inside a silent countdown, unsure how much time remained before the Empire demanded an answer again. Dr. Halden stared at the empty beam on his screen. He felt something deep in his chest, a mix of fear and curiosity. The envoy's words were sharp, but its body language had revealed something else. A tiny hesitation, a slight imbalance in its posture, a flicker of uncertainty in its eyes. The Empire had declared itself as all-powerful. But something about it felt broken. Something about it felt desperate. Something about it felt like a giant, pretending not to limp, and that secret, that weakness, could change everything for Earth. World had spent the entire night arguing, panicking, analyzing, and trying to understand the motives of the Empire. By the time dawn arrived again, people were exhausted, yet no one dared to rest. The giant ships still hovered above the cities like silent mountains, unmoving and unreadable. Every time someone looked up at them, a cold shiver ran down their spine. They were reminders that Earth was no longer alone, and whatever future was coming, it had already begun. Inside the research center, Dr. Halden sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by notes, drawings, and blinking screens. He had not slept properly in 2 days, but he didn't feel the tiredness fully. Curiosity kept him awake. Fear kept him alert. Something inside him whispered that the key to everything was hidden in the smallest details about the Empire. Details most people overlooked. He played the footage of the alien envoy again, slowing down each frame. The figure looked calm, almost regal, but there was a subtle tremor in its left arm, barely noticeable. Its back seemed slightly curved, not in a proud posture, but like someone carrying a weight they couldn't fully bear. When it turned its head, the movement wasn't smooth, more like the joints were strained. These were tiny signs, but to a trained eye, they spoke loudly. The Empire was not strong. It was tired. Meanwhile, all over the world, scientists and analysts reported similar observations. The ship's energy patterns flickered at times. Their support beams shook slightly, as if struggling to remain stable. Their hum wasn't smooth. It rose and fell like a machine that needed repairs. Dr. Halden gathered all these small signs and presented them to the International Council. The room was filled with military officers, diplomats, engineers, and experts. Everyone waited to hear something hopeful. He began simply. The Empire is showing signs of damage. The room went silent instantly. The tension was thick, but hope flickered in people's eyes. Not because they wanted war, but because they needed to know Earth wasn't facing something unstoppable. He played several recordings, pointing out the cracks and flickers in the ship hulls, the slow drifting of the vessels, and the strange way the envoy's body moved. These signs are not from battle, he explained. They look natural, like wear and tear over years, maybe even centuries. One diplomat leaned forward. Are you saying the Empire is weak? Dr. Halden shook his head gently. Not weak, just not at full strength. They look powerful, but their systems seem old. Maybe they've traveled far. Maybe their resources are low. Maybe they are not here as conquerors at their peak, but as a civilization trying to stay alive. A military officer frowned. Then why demand submission? Because, Dr. Halden said softly, weak leaders always shout the loudest. The council exchanged nervous looks. The possibility changed everything. If the Empire wasn't truly strong, then Earth had options. It didn't mean Earth could fight a war, but it meant Earth didn't need to surrender without thought. Still, they had no idea what the Empire was capable of. A damaged fleet was still a fleet far more advanced than anything humans had ever seen. One wrong move could be fatal. While the council studied his findings, the world outside continued to twist in fear and curiosity. People gathered in parks, looking at the ships through binoculars. Families stayed inside, glued to the news. Students discussed theories in mess halls. Some feared the Empire would punish Earth for taking too long to answer. Others believed the ships were simply waiting for a signal from their leaders. In a small village, far from the chaos, an old man sat outside his home, watching the giant ship overhead. He quietly told his grandchildren that fear made humans act in strange ways, but understanding made them strong. His words spread online, and surprisingly, they calmed many people around the world. Sometimes wisdom came from the simplest corners. Back at the government base near the landing site, diplomats prepared to make contact again. This time they carried more careful questions, hoping the envoy would answer without turning hostile. They approached the empty field where the pillar of light had appeared the day before, their steps slow and unsure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the same soft hum vibrated through the air. The ground lit up, and the beam of light descended once more. Slowly, the envoy formed again inside the beam, its body assembling like grains of bright dust. When it fully appeared, it stood tall, observing the humans with the same unreadable gaze. One diplomat cleared his throat and asked cautiously, "We wish to understand the Empire. Why do you need Earth to follow you?" The envoy did not move. Its voice echoed in their minds, gentle but cold. The Empire brings order. Without order, worlds fall to chaos. Earth cannot survive alone. The diplomats exchanged uneasy glances. The envoy spoke with such confidence, but Dr. Halden's findings echoed in their minds. Was this confidence real? Or was it the mask of a fading power? Another diplomat stepped forward. "We want peace, but we need to know what the Empire expects. What does Earth have that the Empire needs?" For the first time, the envoy's expression changed. Not much, but enough. The slight shift in its eyes revealed hesitation, maybe even discomfort. The Empire requires stability, renewal, resources, labor, knowledge. Earth can provide these. The word labor made the diplomats stiffen. It sounded too close to something dangerous. But the envoy had not threatened anything directly. It simply explained what the Empire wanted. One diplomat decided to push further. "Why, Earth? Why now?" The envoy lowered its gaze slightly, as if recalling something painful. The Empire has endured losses. Many worlds fought against the Order. Many were destroyed. The Empire must rebuild. Earth is suitable. The message spread through the world within minutes. People felt their stomachs drop. The Empire was not here out of curiosity. It had come out of necessity, out of desperation. That made it even more unpredictable. In his research center, Dr. Halden felt a strange weight in his chest. The envoy had admitted something without meaning to. The Empire had suffered. It was not expanding. It was trying to survive. And when a large power is desperate, it becomes dangerous in new ways. He wrote down a single line in his notebook. They need us. More than we need them. Meanwhile, in the skies above Earth, the ships began to shift slightly. Not much, just a few meters, but it was enough to send waves of panic across every major city. People ran indoors, fearing an attack. Military bases went into full alert. But the ships didn't charge weapons. They didn't move aggressively. They simply adjusted themselves, as if correcting their balance. Yet the movement confirmed something important for Dr. Halden. The ships had trouble staying perfectly steady. They were compensating for something: internal weakness, failing stabilizers, or lack of energy. Every detail deepened his belief. The Empire was running out of time. During this period of global fear, the Council asked him to explain his findings in front of a larger group. As he spoke, he kept his voice calm and clear. They aren't here to destroy us right away. If destruction was their goal, they could have done it the moment they arrived. Instead, they made demands. That means they want something from us. And anything that needs something is vulnerable. A military commander asked, "But can we risk refusing them?" Dr. Halden paused. Refusing blindly is dangerous. Surrendering blindly is worse. But we can negotiate, push boundaries, ask questions. The Empire needs cooperation, not conflict. That gives us power. The room fell silent again. For the first time since the Empire arrived, Earth had a sliver of hope. Not hope for victory, but hope for a strategy. Outside, people slowly began to sense that something had changed. Reports spread online about scientists discovering flaws in the alien fleet. Some still didn't believe it. Some thought it was false hope. But many clung to the idea that Earth was not facing an unbeatable giant dot as night approached. The sky glowed faintly with the reflection of the alien ships. The world watched, waiting for the next move. The Empire had shown its intentions not now. Earth was beginning to see its weaknesses. And in that fragile space between fear and understanding, humanity began to think differently, not like helpless victims, but like people who might have a chance to protect their world. The world was trying its best to stay calm, but fear still moved quietly through every street and every home. It had been days since the Empire made its demand, and although nothing violent had happened, the silence felt heavier than any attack could. The giant ships still hung above Earth like massive shadows, and every time they shifted even a little, millions of people held their breath. In the underground command center, the atmosphere was tense. Officers were working at their stations, screens blinking with live data from satellites, drones, and observatories. Technicians whispered updates. Diplomats waited for messages. Everyone tried to look busy, but the truth was simple. No one knew what the Empire would do next. Meanwhile, Dr. Halden stood in the middle of a room full of exhausted scientists. Many hadn't seen sunlight for days. Their desks were covered with empty coffee cups, half-eaten meals, and stacks of papers filled with diagrams. They were tired, but they refused to stop. They knew Earth depended on their work. Dr. Halden went over the newest readings from the alien fleet. The ships were powerful, yes, but every hour showed more signs of internal weakness. Tiny fluctuations in energy, slow drifting, delayed responses, and strange pulses that didn't match any known pattern. He kept reminding everyone to pay attention to the smallest details. Sometimes the smallest crack revealed the biggest weakness. While the scientists studied the data, messages from different governments flooded the center. Some nations wanted to negotiate. Others demanded stronger defenses. A few believed Earth should secretly prepare a counterattack. But no one could agree, and time was slipping away. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, without warning, the sky lit up with bright flashes. At first, people thought the ships were preparing to fire. Crowds screamed. Cars stopped in the middle of roads. News anchors stumbled over their words. But within seconds, military satellites confirmed the truth. The Empire wasn't attacking. They had fired at Earth's satellites instead, carefully, precisely, and without causing harm on the ground. One by one, the satellites went dark, leaving large sections of Earth without proper communication. Global internet slowed. GPS signals glitched. Several countries lost contact with each other. That it was a warning, not destruction. A demonstration got a message without words. The Empire could cripple Earth without firing at humans. The world froze in shock. Dr. Halden stared at the satellite footage, feeling a mix of fear and confirmation. The Empire had shown its power, but even in this act, something felt off. The precision was too controlled, almost cautious. It looked like they didn't want to waste energy or cause damage they couldn't manage afterward. Their actions were strong, but their restraint revealed uncertainty. The council gathered immediately. Leaders, officers, and experts filled the room with raised voices and tense expressions. Some argued that Earth had no choice but to surrender now. Others insisted the Empire had shown just enough strength to scare Earth, but not enough to win a full confrontation. Dr. Halden waited for the room to quiet down before speaking. They disabled our satellites, he said, but they picked targets carefully. They avoided anything that could lead to casualties. If their goal was domination, they would have chosen more devastating targets. A military commander frowned. They're showing us they can take away our eyes and ears. Yes, Holden replied, but they're also showing boundaries. That means they aren't acting from a place of absolute power. They're being careful. The diplomats nodded. They understood exactly what he meant. Careful enemies were afraid of making mistakes. A general leaned forward. What are you suggesting? D.R. Halden took a breath. We need a different approach. Not violence, not surrender, but strategy. They depend on a centralized system for controlling their ships. If we can understand it, we might interrupt their communication long enough to force negotiations in our favor. The room went silent. This wasn't a plan for war. This was a plan to level the field. A cyber expert spoke next. If their fleet is truly linked to one main core, any interference will create confusion across multiple ships. Even small interruptions could cause chaos. Another expert added, we've already detected odd signals between the ships. They communicate constantly. If we disrupt that, even slightly, they'll struggle to keep formation. The idea was simple but risky. Disrupt. The Empire's control system forced them to reveal how fragile they truly were. Use their weakness to open a door toward negotiation. The Council agreed to prepare a small group of specialist scientists, engineers, and communication experts to work on this secretly. No public announcement, no broadcasts, nothing that could alert the Empire. Every step had to be quiet. Meanwhile, outside the command center, people around the world reacted in different ways to the satellite strike. Some panicked and rushed to markets for supplies. Others prayed in open fields. Many stayed glued to screens, waiting for updates. But surprisingly, some communities came together. Neighbors shared food. Youth groups helped elders find news sources. Strangers comforted each other. Fear sometimes breaks people apart, but sometimes it brings them close. Back in the research center, Dr. Halden's team worked day and night. They studied every signal, every frequency, every hum coming from the ships. They played recordings forward, backward, slowed, sped up, filtered, and layered. After long hours of studying the patterns, they found something vital. The Empire's control signals followed a slow, pulsing rhythm like a heartbeat. If that heartbeat broke even for a second, the ships might lose coordination. The room buzzed with energy. For the first time, the scientists felt a sense of direction. Not victory, not safety, but possibility. Using this discovery, they built a device that could send a slight distortion signal upward. Nothing strong, nothing harmful. Just enough to nudge the Empire's rhythm out of sync for a moment. But they needed to be careful. If the Empire detected interference too early, they might retaliate. The plan required perfect timing. The Council debated for hours. Some were terrified of provoking the Empire. Others believed it was Earth's only chance. In the end, they agreed to attempt a small test, something tiny, unnoticeable, just to observe the reaction. The device was activated. A gentle pulse was sent upward, invisible and silent. Everyone stared at the monitors, hearts pounding. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The ships hovered as usual. The hum continued. The lights flickered in their normal pattern. Then, suddenly, one ship tilted slightly, not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable. Its lights blinked twice, late and uneven. The ships beside it shifted to compensate. Clumsy and uncoordinated. People in the command center gasped quietly. The Empire's fleet depended heavily on synchronized control. And that meant one thing. Earth had found the first real weakness. The test lasted only seconds, but its effect was undeniable. When the ships regained their usual position, the room burst into whispers. A feeling of hope, cautious, fragile, but real, spread through the air. They did not destroy anything. They did not harm anyone. They simply caused a disruption that should have been impossible for a perfect, all-powerful empire. Now Earth knew that perfect was only an illusion. The Council immediately ordered the test device turned off. The goal was never attack, only understanding. They waited anxiously to see if the Empire reacted. Minutes passed, then an hour, then two. No envoy appeared. No new message came. No ships repositioned. It seemed the Empire hadn't noticed the tiny interference at all. But something else became clear. The Empire's strength was a mask worn over a tired face. When the day ended, Dr. Halden stepped outside for the first time in a long while. The sky was dark, and the giant ships glowed softly above, like strange lanterns. He felt the cold air on his face and realized people around the world were starting to feel differently. Fear was still there, but now something else stood beside it. Determination. The Empire had demanded submission, but Earth had just discovered it didn't have to kneel. In this quiet act, this small disruption in the sky, was the moment everything changed. The day the Empire's confidence began to crack started quietly. The sky over many countries was calm, and people on the ground went about their routines with a strange kind of forced normality. The Empire's ships still hung above the planet, massive dark shapes that blocked portions of the sunlight. They didn't fire on anyone that morning. They didn't send warnings. They just stayed there, watching in silence. But inside their fleet, not everything was calm, the way it looked from below. On Earth, the team working with the scientist had spent the whole night running new tests. Everyone was tired, but no one wanted to stop. They had discovered something in the Empire's command network that felt too important to ignore. The signals coming from the fleet weren't just strong. They were old, like a system patched again and again over centuries. The scientist kept pointing out that the Empire relied too heavily on one central core. If something affected that core, everything else would stumble. The group gathered in a small underground control room filled with screens and cables. There were engineers, communication experts, analysts, and even a few people who had joined from simple online calls, offering skills that the officials didn't expect would matter. That was the strange thing happening across the world. People who had no connection to governments or militaries suddenly became important. One expert from a distant country who usually repaired old radios discovered a method to break down parts of the alien signal. Another person who made software for fun at home managed to map patterns in the Empire's data strings. In any normal situation, none of these people would have been inside a secure facility. But this wasn't a normal day on Earth. Everyone could feel the pace increasing. Messages came every few minutes from different regions, telling the team that people everywhere were trying to help. Some tested signals. Some broke codes. Some just stayed awake and recorded patterns. All of this created a sense of growing unity across the planet. It wasn't the unity that politicians made speeches about. It wasn't forced agreement. It was something different people simply choosing to stand together. Around midday, the scientist received a direct report that made him stop talking mid-sentence. He read the data twice and showed it to the room. What they were looking at wasn't a small crack in the Empire's system. It was a spreading weakness. The Empire's algorithms were beginning to misread Earth's responses. They were trying to interpret millions of separate signals at once, which caused slowdowns in their internal connections. Their control core was strong, but not strong enough to handle the storm of new input Earth was sending. Someone asked if Earth should slow down to avoid provoking the Empire too quickly. The scientist shook his head and said that slowing down would show fear. The Empire expected humanity to be overwhelmed. They expected panic, silence, or surrender. But they didn't expect this many minds working at the same time, with different backgrounds, different languages, different skills. That was Earth's strength. Not power. Not weapons. People dot outside. The Empire noticed the disruptions later that afternoon. Their ships began to shift slightly, no longer holding perfect stillness. To people on the ground, it was barely noticeable, but to trained observers watching the readings, it was clear something was wrong. The fleet was struggling to synchronize. Some smaller ships drifted out of formation and then jerked back into place, like someone pulling them on invisible strings. Inside the Empire fleet, officers debated whether Earth was attempting a covert attack. But they were confused. Nothing they detected looked like a weapon. It looked like noise, harmless noise from a planet of unorganized species. But the disruption kept spreading. The Empire had never faced anything like this. Their past conquests were against worlds with predictable defenses. Every civilization they defeated followed clear structures. But Earth wasn't responding the same way. Humans were unpredictable. Different ideas came from different corners of the world, and none of them connected in predictable patterns. That made the Empire's system panic. By evening, the disruptions grew worse. Signals that were once perfectly aligned now carried delays. The fleet's stabilizers miscalculated atmospheric pressure. A few ships dipped lower than planned before rising again. Others rotated in strange angles, even though no orders for movement were given. The Empire's leaders realized something they hadn't admitted out loud. They were losing control. Not because Earth was stronger, but because Earth was unpredictable. Back in the underground control room, the team monitored everything with growing tension. They pushed forward with the plan to broadcast distorted signals into the Empire's network. It wasn't something that would hurt anyone physically, but it could create confusion inside the alien systems. A technician read out the frequency breakdown and confirmed that it matched the earlier tests. The scientist gave a quiet nod. For a second, everyone in the room held their breath, waiting for the first wave of the distorted signals to spread upward toward the fleet. The room fell, silent except for the soft hum of machines. One screen blinked. Then another. Data feeds from satellites and ground stations came pouring in. The Empire's systems reacted almost instantly. Their ships flickered with flashes of light that weren't weapons, but warning signals from their own machinery. Some lost their communication links for a full minute, drifting without control before reconnecting. The long lines of lights on the fleet's hulls dimmed and brightened unevenly, like a city losing and regaining power. People around the world watched the sky, unaware of the technical details, but sensing that something dramatic was happening above them. Videos spread online showing ships wobbling, lights flickering, formations breaking. Every ordinary person who saw it felt the same thing, a strange mix of fear and hope. Inside the Empire's main command ship, officers argued over emergency responses. Their unity, once so strong and strict, finally began to break. One officer insisted they should retreat temporarily. Another demanded they punish Earth for interfering. A third argued the control core needed to shut down for repairs. Their voices echoed through the metal halls with rising tension. Some even sent private messages toward Earth, hoping to negotiate alone. They didn't want to admit it to their own leaders, but they saw the danger growing. They knew their technology was failing. They knew Earth wasn't attacking them with weapons, but with the one thing the Empire couldn't handle: unpredictable human thinking. The scientists' team didn't celebrate. They understood that the situation was still dangerous. A desperate empire could still lash out. But the signs of collapse were clear. Their centralized system couldn't reset without leaving their fleet helpless. Their officers were no longer following one direction. Their ships were losing trust in their own commands. The Empire had built its rule on the belief that strength meant certainty. Everything had to be orderly, controlled, perfectly aligned. But Earth didn't work that way, and that difference was tearing the Empire's confidence apart from the inside. Late at night, the scientist stepped outside the facility for a moment to breathe fresh air. He looked up at the sky, where the dark shapes floated unevenly. For the first time since they arrived, he felt that humanity had a real chance. Not because Earth had become stronger overnight, but because the Empire had revealed how fragile it really was. Power without flexibility could collapse if pushed from the right angle. He knew the next part of the struggle would decide everything. The Empire wasn't finished yet. They still had weapons, still had ships, still had pride. But the cracks were open now, wide and spreading, and everyone on Earth could see it. Those who had been terrified only days before now felt courage rising in their hearts. They weren't powerless. They weren't alone. And they weren't done. The final day of the Empire's presence over Earth began with a strange calm. People woke up expecting fear, chaos, or loud warnings from governments, but what they found instead was an unusual quiet. The huge alien ships still floated in the sky, but their movements looked slow and tired, as if they were drifting instead of controlling their positions. There were no threats, no commands, no angry messages. Just silence. On the ground, people everywhere stepped outside and looked upward. Some recorded videos. Some whispered prayers. Some just watched with uncertain eyes, wondering if this was the beginning of the end, or the moment everything finally turned in their favor. The ships no longer looked like symbols of power. They looked like giant shadows losing their strength. Inside the underground facility, where the scientist and the team had been working for so long, everyone gathered around their screens again. No one had slept properly for days, but the energy in the room felt different this time. It wasn't nervous or tense like before. It felt like the world was holding its breath. During the night, the team had continued to read the signals coming from the Empire's fleet. Most of the alien communications were not even encrypted anymore. The Empire was struggling so much with its own systems that many of their internal channels were leaking unprotected information. The team could now hear fragments of their discussions. Not full sentences, but enough to understand what was going on up there. The Empire was not in command anymore. Some officers were demanding to retreat. Others were begging for help from distant parts of their own empire. A few were arguing that fighting Earth further would destroy what was left of their power. They were divided. Their unity had shattered, and once that unity broke, their entire structure began to fall apart. By noon, the largest ship in the center of the fleet dimmed its lights completely. People across Earth saw it. A huge dark shape slowly rotated, drifting slightly out of alignment. It looked almost harmless now, like a dead machine that had lost its purpose. The scientist watched the screen and whispered that this must be the command ship losing connection with the control core. Minutes later, a new signal reached Earth. It wasn't loud or threatening. It wasn't delivered with the confidence the Empire once showed. It came through a low, shaky frequency that the team barely recognized at first. When they decoded it, they saw it was a message from the Empire's envoy, the same representative who had once ordered Earth to surrender, but the tone was completely different. The envoy's voice, usually stern and cold, sounded weak, even exhausted. The message was short. They said the Empire would no longer enforce its rule on Earth. They explained that their fleet was unable to continue the operation. They admitted that their systems were failing and that many officers were refusing to follow commands. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was close enough that people around the world felt a wave of relief. For the first time since the fleet appeared, the Empire was not giving orders. It was giving up, but the message didn't end there. The envoy hesitated, then added something unexpected. They admitted that the Empire had been declining for a long time. Their worlds were struggling. Their technology was old and slowly failing. Their people were tired of constant expansion. They had come to Earth not because they saw Earth as a threat or as a powerful prize, but because they were desperate. Desperate for resources, desperate for a new place to rebuild, desperate for survival. When the message ended, everyone in the control room looked around at each other. There was no cheering, no celebration, just a quiet moment of understanding. The Empire was not the unstoppable force they seemed. They were just another civilization facing its own downfall. Hours passed while Earth's leaders discussed the next step. No one wanted to cause harm. No one wanted revenge. And no one wanted to make the Empire's collapse worse than it already was. Eventually, a decision was made. A peaceful response was sent back to the fleet. Earth would not attack or punish them. They would open a line of communication for evacuation or assistance if needed. But the Empire had to leave Earth's orbit. Near evening, the sky changed again. The ships that had looked frozen all day began to move. Slowly at first, then with more direction. They were leaving, not in their proud formations, not with their bright lights or powerful engines. They left like a tired group walking away after losing a long battle. Across the world, people gathered to watch the ships rise higher into the sky. Some cried from relief. Some clapped. Some simply stared, wanting to remember the moment forever. For many, it felt like waking up from a nightmare that lasted too long. In the command room, the scientist watched the readings as the fleet moved farther from the planet. His hands trembled slightly. He had been calm through all the danger, but now that it was ending, he felt overwhelmed. An officer beside him asked if he was all right. The scientist said he was, but his voice cracked. He wasn't sad. He wasn't scared. He was just relieved beyond words. But before the fleet completely left orbit, something unusual happened. A few small ships detached from the rest and approached Earth again. The team prepared themselves, unsure if this was a final threat or a last attempt at negotiation. But when the transmissions came through, they were not warnings. They were requests. The officers on those smaller ships were asking for permission to stay, not as conquerors, but as refugees. They didn't want power. They didn't want resources. They simply had nowhere else to go. Their worlds were failing. Their empire was collapsing. And they feared that if they returned to their territory, they would face punishment for what happened. The leaders on Earth took hours to discuss the matter. It wasn't an easy decision. Allowing alien refugees to stay would change many things. But in the end, humanity chose compassion. Earth agreed to let the smaller group land in a controlled, peaceful area where they could be watched and supported. Not as invaders, not as threats, but as living beings in need. Late that night, the scientist was asked to help with the arrangements. He had spent so much time understanding the Empire's systems that he could communicate with them more easily than others. As he walked toward the open field where the small ships were scheduled to land, he felt a strange sense of peace. For once, he wasn't trying to solve a crisis. He wasn't fighting against anything. He was helping to guide a peaceful moment. When the small ships touched down, their doors opened slowly. The aliens who stepped out looked nothing like the proud figures Earth had seen earlier. They looked tired, unsure, and even scared. The scientist stepped forward gently, raising his hands in a calm gesture. He spoke softly, telling them they were safe now. One of the aliens bowed their head slightly, a gesture of gratitude. It was a small moment, but it meant something powerful. Two species, once standing on the edge of conflict, now meeting in peace. As the night grew darker, and the last of the Empire's main fleet disappeared into the stars, humanity realized something important. They had not only protected their home, they had also changed the course of an empire's history. Not through force, not through war, but through unity.